But I'm curious, we talk about 10 years, you guys have been a part of the fantasy football industry,
Yeah.
and it's probably a full podcast, but just some high level takeaways. In what ways have you seen the positives of fantasy football, the growth, the change, and just sort of as you project the future of the fantasy football community, culture, industry, what are maybe some of the concerns? Positives, negatives, where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean it's a big broad question. It's changed a lot. Content creation has changed tremendously. The barrier to entry in that space has changed tremendously. So, when we first came in, we thought we were late. It's funny. It's 10 years. We thought we were late. It was the big players. It was CBS and ESPN, and they had prominent, shows, but there weren't a lot of smaller shows. There wasn't Instagram Reels and TikTok and, YouTube content. And so accessibility of content, there's no shortage of content in fantasy football. So that's been a dramatic change since the time that we began. We also began in a time in which the DFS and sports betting landscape was non-existent, or if it was unregulated, and we didn't really, even touch the outskirts of that space because of the lack of regulation and protections for consumers. And so there were like a bunch of companies that were doing unregulated stuff in the space, and then the governors started shutting down sports betting, and so all those companies lost their money, and they went out of business, and they didn't exist, and then regulation came. And so the translation of all of that through the fantasy space has been interesting. It's been I think a financial driver for a lot of startups and different companies to get off the ground with whether it's DFS or best ball or some of the different regulated sports areas. So that's been an interesting thing to watch, mostly from the sidelines, but also like talking to other like-minded professionals in the industry and what they see happening and how they're adjusting to it. So, technology has changed, which has allowed more complicated gaming. It's not like I grew up playing fantasy football with a newspaper or, with touchdown only leagues. You have tons of different platforms and software to, be able to track your league or have complicated rule sets. So those things have made, aiming your content at the right kind of space a little bit more difficult, I think, because everybody likes a different thing. But those are kind of the high level things that I think I've noticed the most over the last handful of years is just the amount of creators entering the space, the type of content, the platforms, and then the sports betting regulation side.